The British colonialists were exploiters and oppressors, but many among them stood by India and fought for the country's freedom. Annie Besant was one of such almost forgotten personalities. She was a British socialist, educationist, and women's rights activist who played a pivotal role in the Indian freedom struggle through her advocacy for Indian self rule and by founding institutions focused on education and social reform, as well as public awareness. Remarkably, she was the founder of India's Home Rule League and Varanasi's Central Hindu College, and this college later became the nucleus for the prestigious Banaras Hindu University. Annie established a newspaper that played a major role in rousing public awareness and a powerful voice of the freedom movement. Annie Wood was born on October 1, 1847 in London to middle-class parents William Burton Presswood and Emily Morris. She was educated at home as a young child because of her fragile health. As a teenager, she rejected Christianity and adopted rationalist and free thinking philosophies after undergoing a crisis of faith. At age 20, she married Anglican minister Frank Besant but separated from him over religious differences in 1873. Left with two children and no income, she began writing and lecturing on secularist ideals. She joined the Fabian Society and became involved in left-wing politics. Annie Besant was intrigued by Theosophy's emphasis on Eastern knowledge systems. After a meeting with its founders in London, she embraced Theosophy in 1889. It is an esoteric, philosophical, and spiritual movement begun in 1875 by Helena Blavatsky, Henry Steele Olcott, and others seeking universal truths and focusing on mysticism and metaphysics. Through her theosophical travels, Annie observed social conditions in India at close quarters. She was pained by the extent of poverty, lack of education and access, repression of women through traditions like child marriage and caste based discrimination faced by marginalized groups. This strengthened her conviction that India needed self governance and social reforms. In 1898, along with fellow theosophists, she helped establish the Central Hindu College in Varanasi, aimed at educating Indian youth in both Eastern mystical knowledge and Western analytical systems and humanities. This college later formed the nucleus of the Banaras Hindu University. Over time, her theosophy inspired understanding of Indian philosophy, shaped her Swadeshi or indigenous nationalist position. She saw potential in uniting India's spiritual traditions with modern values and institutions. In 1907, Annie Besant took her Indian activism a step further by founding and editing New India or The New India, a nationalist newspaper published from Madras, now Chennai. Modeled after Irish papers, it highlighted issues and grievances around British rule and repression. The newspaper kept the language simple to appeal to the Indian masses. It focused on key nationalist themes like Swaraj, Swadeshi economic self sufficiency, uplifting repressed groups like women, ending social evils, and promoting modern education suited to Indian conditions. The New India gave a media voice to Annie Besant's uncompromising positions on Indian self rule, unitary nationhood, and reform, which were more radical than the moderate early Congress. Along with political commentary, it also covered spirituality, arts, and culture aimed at defining Indian national identity against colonial stereotypes. As the newspaper grew popular for airing public disaffection openly, the British authorities marked it as seditious and dangerous. Its offices were repeatedly raided and fined, while Besant was warned and monitored closely, bringing her into direct conflict with the establishment. Through the New India, Annie Besant powerfully harnessed print media for public impact to build nationalist consciousness, which aligned with her leadership of the Home Rule League demanding immediate self governance. It marked an important communication shift in India's independence movement. Annie Besant formally entered politics in 1913 by joining the Indian National Congress, which had been founded in 1885 as a forum for prominent Indians to petition for a greater voice in running the country. Under leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji, Badruddin Tyabji, and Firoz Shah Mehta, the early moderate Congress mainly passed resolutions seeking civil liberties, democratic reforms, and greater Indian participation within the colonial state structure. However, their loyalist constitutional approach failed to wrest significant authority from the British. The Congress remained a debating society, unable to mobilize mass support. Frustrated with the ineffectiveness, Annie positioned herself as a firebrand leader, demanding outright self rule or Swaraj along the lines that British nationalist leader Charles Stuart Parnell had envisaged for Ireland under the British Empire. In 1916, Besant founded the All India Home Rule League, modeled after the Irish Home Rule movement. Along with co-founders Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, she explicitly demanded home rule or self-governance for India within 2 years. This nationalist demand marked a sharp shift from the early Congress's piecemeal reform agenda, and he organized a strong organizational structure for the League, traveling extensively to give public lectures, mobilizing students, women, and the working class towards civil disobedience against unjust British policies. Her uncompromising stand attracted youth leaders like Motilal Nehru and his son Jawaharlal into the League. However, her open defiance alarmed British officials who saw it as a dangerous spark that could ignite wider unrest and disorder. In 1917, the rattled authorities arrested Annie under charges of sedition and she was placed under house arrest in Ooty for 6 months, causing outrage among her followers. Gandhi held protests demanding her release, as did both League members and moderate Congress leaders like Jinnah, which was a sign of growing pan Indian unity around the demand for self rule. Besant was freed after she reluctantly signed a promise that she would disband such nationalist work against the state. However, her detention had the opposite effect of popularizing her as a martyr and symbol of defiance. In December 1917, immediately after her release, Annie was elected president of the Indian National Congress. As the organization's first female president, it represented the increasing power of radical voices within a party that had long been a loyalist elite forum. The moderate and aggressive factions of the Congress joined hands under her stewardship. They committed themselves to the demand for self governance, economically uplift the masses, and an end to repressive policies. This gave a coherent shape to the nationalist movement, which would intensify in the coming Gandhian era. Thus, Annie Besant played a catalyzing role in transforming the early Congress from piecemeal constitutional petitioning to outright mass struggle for overthrowing the colonial rule. Through the Home Rule League and her fearless speeches, she spread the seditious doctrine of Purna Swaraj or complete independence, which became a catchphrase for the quintessential nationalist goal. Parallel to her political battles, Annie Besant made profound contributions to expanding modern Indian education. She looked upon education as a means of social reform and national awakening. She firmly believed that India's regeneration required a radically new learning ecosystem rooted in both its indigenous knowledge traditions and contemporary Western sciences. In 1898, during her early theosophy years, she co founded the Central Hindu College in Banaras along with fellow scholar Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya. They aimed to provide an integrated education experience synthesizing ancient Indian wisdom, spiritualism, and language study with a rigorous modern curriculum. This college developed into the nucleus of what became the Banaras Hindu University, which was established formally in 1919. As a key founder and fundraiser, Annie Besant helped construct this premier institution and shape its educational philosophy. Built on a vast 1,300-acre campus on the outskirts of Banaras, now Varanasi, the BHU became one of Asia's largest residential universities focusing on science, technology, and liberal arts education. Of course, it retained the foundations in Hindu studies and theology. It followed a model of autonomy and broad access, regardless of religion, caste, or class, that was rare for the era under a repressive colonial environment. The stress was on learning integrated with character development, social consciousness, self representation, and nation building. Well, advanced education was a privilege of tiny Indian elites serving the British interests. This fulfilled her vision of modern education as a tool to dismantle colonial strangleholds. Annie Besant served as vice president of the Central Hindu College Committee and then as trustee of the BHU Foundation for many years. Through regular fundraising lectures abroad, she mobilized donations, infrastructure, and intellectual support to help nurture BHU during its formative years. Even in her final years, Besant continued founding innovative educational institutions like building the first model school in Bombay, now Mumbai, along progressive lines. In Varanasi, she established the World University focused on global peace and intercultural study. Her stress was always on contextual learning to bridge India's circumstances with wider advances. Through her hands on institution building spanning schools, colleges, and universities over decades, Annie Besant actively fostered the social revolutions in Indian education, intellectual development, and youth empowerment that she considered vital for national resurgence. Her legacy is most visible in the Banaras Hindu University's status as independent India's largest residential university, concentrating on liberal professional education grounded in ethics and community orientation, principles that Besant specified at its founding. In 1931, she became ill and died on 20 September 1933 at age 85 in Adyar, Madras Presidency, British India. Her body was cremated. She was survived by her daughter Mabel.